Chapter 11. Vittoria sat on a plush chair in a long hallway lined with sprigs of ivy. Gulls chanted in the background as she waited, heart pounding. 3 guardians surrounded her. Their broad bodies blocked her view of the area, but she knew where she was. Magnolia Castle. The castle had always loomed large and beautiful and pristinely white in the distance of her life. Extensive gardens dotted with magnolia trees surrounded the flowing structure. Its white stone sprawled across the beach. A lovely building filled with landowner snakes. Now, she sat in the middle of it, alone, unprotected. Oddly, she didn't fear for herself yet. Did Bernat and his men get away? Her stomach clenched at the memory of Bernat's horror. What was happening with Mateo? Based on the location of the sun, they were probably just minutes away from the start of the first test. What had she done? The slam of a door reverberated down the white-walled hallway. She jumped as a scratchy voice declared, "Bring her in." The guardian from the marketplace motioned for her to stand. When he took her arm, it was with a gentle touch. He was oddly kind. The intensity of his expression had faded. In the aftermath, he appeared younger than she'd expected. Only a few years older than her, perhaps a bit thinner, even. He didn't make eye contact, but closely watched her. Instead of shoving her the way she'd anticipated, he guided her through a double-doored archway that appeared out of nowhere in the white wall. A spell, perhaps, to protect the entrance to the High Priestess' office. Her stomach felt leaden as she followed him through the arch. She risked a glance up, but he still didn't meet her gaze. What would Mateo say to her now? Her first chance to truly support him, and she was gone. He'd worry about her, and that would distract him. She hoped that Bernat and his men were able to get free of the mob and that they'd lie to Mateo, that they wouldn't tell him the muck she'd gotten herself into, that they'd find her later without involving him. Surely, Hodei wouldn't just kill her. Would he? Well, why wouldn't he? Fate had her now. Nothing to do but see where it took her. "Vittoria, do come in." A broken, bent man stood in the middle of a circular room. Windows dotted the far wall, lined with emerald glass and colorful seashells along the edges. Bookshelves filled the rest of the round walls. The warble of a songbird issued in the background, strangely at odds with the shadows and the man's stare. A musty smell lingered in the air, as if the windows hadn't been opened in years. Vittoria stopped halfway to him. His oddly curved spine made him equal to her in height. All the paintings depicted him as a hulking, strapping man, like Mateo. How far he had dwindled. For years, rumors had circulated among workers that Hodei's evil had warped his spine, that he paid for his sins through physical torment. La Turere, the giver of peace, had abandoned him, they claimed. Somehow, immobile before him, she believed it. They regarded each other with unchecked curiosity. Vittoria fought off a little shudder. Hodei, probably the most frightening witch in all the world. She stood alone with him now while her only hope battled for all their lives. Givers, but she'd messed up. "Have a seat." A chair knocked into the back of her knees and forced her to sit. She gripped the arms before it toppled backwards. It was a heavy thing, made of carved wood, and didn't fall as she'd expected it to. In fact, she didn't move at all. Magic bound her to the seat. Hodei called across the room, "You may leave." She glanced up and swallowed a scream. A worker shuffled out of the shadows. He wore the usual emerald-green garb of castle workers, but his eyes were sunken in, as if permanently bruised. Slashes of black twine crossed his lips, sewing them shut. The edges were a bright red and tinged with blood, as if fresh. She fought the urge to vomit. A personal worker, no doubt. Hodei smiled as the boy passed, but it was glacial and calculated. He'd had the worker appear just now on purpose. He wanted to scare her. Vittoria suppressed her panic. The door shut behind the boy, sealing them inside. "There's nothing I hate more than traitors," Hodei mused in a light tone as he stared at the door. "Once a liar, always a liar. Now, on to business. Your betrothal to Mateo took me by surprise. Might I also say it impressed me. It's been a while since someone has been able to startle me. Congratulations, Vittoria. I did not anticipate you." His hoarse voice harbored no amusement. The cold chair felt like slivers of ice against her skin. He leaned toward her, the knuckles that held his cane blanching white. Despite his diminutive size, she felt small sitting before him. "You must be more comfortable in your new lifestyle." She didn't respond. Hodei continued, "In fact, that's a very interesting cape you have on.
Far beyond anything you've ever worn before, I would venture. Do you know the significance of it?"
His eyes studied the ivory cloak more closely. He made a sound in his throat. Vittoria swallowed. Unsure of what to say, she remained silent and tried not to look afraid. Disappointment crossed his features.
"No? Well, that's odd. Most workers love their La Principessa. Doesn't the magnolia symbolize your giver?"
"She's not my giver," Vittoria heard herself say. Hodei blinked.
"No?"
This time, she clamped her mouth shut. Hodei mumbled something. She caught only the word,
"Interesting,"
in the garbled sound. He shifted in his seat with a grimace he tried to hide.
"You surprise me again. You were hoping to watch Mateo and the Discouraged today, I assume?"
She reluctantly nodded. He glanced at the window.
"Shame,"
he said with a tisk.
"Your first opportunity to show loyalty to him, and it's gone. You are here, with the witch he hates more than anyone in the world, instead of at his side. How do you feel about that?"
Vittoria's breath sped up as she attempted to hold in her panic. Oh, what a wily, aged bag of bones. He continued.
"It's odd, you know, having two sons who hate me, but want the same thing. Two sons willing to battle to the death for the prize. Such a prize it is. Leadership, power, a network to control."
His wrinkled skin showed no change to support the drawl in his tone. Despite his gasping, wheezy breaths, his mental faculties seemed sharp as needles. From the far side of the room, a birdcage slid across the floor and stopped in front of him. He reached a gnarled finger through the slats. The yellow songbird, a little thing no bigger than her palm, let out a strangled sound. It shied away when he touched it, then stopped, as if something held it there. Its feathers fluffed out as it gave a strangled warble. Hodei stroked the downy wing while the bird trembled.
"I didn't start this war between workers and landowners, you know, nor am I the reason it has escalated to such tragic heights."
Vittoria bit back a scoff too late. A peep burst out of her throat. Hodei ignored it.
"She did."
Her mind worked desperately to ascertain what he meant. She? Who was she? His nostrils flared, and his hand shook as he stroked the terrified bird.
"Esperanza."
Vittoria racked her mind. That name should mean something to her. There, on the edge of consciousness, was a tingle of familiarity. It disappeared as quickly as it had come. Who was Esperanza?
"My sons may hate me, but it's their mare who stands guilty. She consigned them to this fate. Without her betrayal, I would never have taken Romeo, would never have pitted them against each other."
Of course. The deceased High Priestess, Esperanza. A witch rarely spoken of in the worker world, and, she imagined, the landowner world as well. Bits of memory served her, hazy and incomplete, swirls of rumor and speculation. Tragedy on one end, death on the other. Something about misaligned sympathies and banishment to the country. There had been true anguish in Hodei's voice, but he'd already schooled his expression back to one of annoyance.
"Romeo has always been the weaker of the two boys in some ways,"
Hodei continued, as if discussing insignificant details of his day.
"Which is why I could mold him. But he has slowly taken over my role, with more talent and ruthlessness than I expected. He fancies himself the high priest already, while I am yet alive. Can you imagine?"
Bitterness edged his voice. "And you resent that?" Hodei smiled with paper-thin lips, and it sent a chill through her.
"It is my power he plays with, Vittoria. Borrowed power. I am not dead yet, no matter how much you and my sons may wish it. But that's not what calls you here today."
"Then what does?"
"Mateo is the weaker of the two in all the ways that hurt them most,"
Hodei said, as if she hadn't spoken. He tapped the side of his head, then his chest.
"He is weaker here and here. He forms attachments, gives in to compassion. No ruler can afford compassion, Vittoria. It means that Mateo will never be able to kill his brother."
Despite her terror, she kept her expression even. He didn't look at her, didn't gauge her reaction. He spoke in an even cadence and then seemed to think about what he'd just said. Ice flooded her entire body as she sat there, wishing she'd listened to Banat. The songbird gave a pathetic bleat as Hodei ran the tip of his finger over its frozen face. Then, after a firm tap of Hodei's finger on the top of its head, the bird crashed to the bottom of the cage in a flurry of feathers. Dead. Hodei canted his head, regarding the bird. Then he cleared his throat and turned to Vittoria.
I brought you here to meet you, Vittoria. You who are the key to undoing all my hard work. Likely the only witch who can skirt the two worlds I've carefully created for the good of our network. You could unravel everything I have done, and even that may be acceptable. The world will change after my death. I cannot stop that. But borrowed power, betrayal, those things are not acceptable, and I shall not let them go unrevealed.
Her mind whirled when his gaze dropped to her cloak, then to her. A silent, rapt fascination had overtaken her. Hodei smirked, looking like death before it pounced.
Mateo may think you're safe with him, but you should know you never are. Secrets are not safe from me, Vittoria. None of them. I always find out. I have allowed you to live for one reason, and one reason alone. There is something I want you to seek.
What?
The truth.
Her brow furrowed. The truth about what? His chilly eyes met hers like daggers.
Why, Vittoria? Why did Esperanza stay?
Stay where? He lifted both hands, as if to encompass all of the world, and ignored her question.
Esperanza stayed, and that is why I sit here today. Why you are a worker with no rights whatsoever. Why your nephew starved in the streets, and your pair lived a painful life as a broken man. It all comes down to that one single question. Why did she stay? You are the only witch who can answer that question. Because sometimes even the witches we trust the most will make fools of us.
Me? Truth rang in his voice, but it seemed like a matter-of-fact statement, as if he were merely still puzzled how someone had managed to best him. There had to be more to the story, which was the most frightening part. Hodei shifted in a move that seemed an attempt to conceal pain.
Your path is set now, and to stray would remove what little honor life has gifted you. Or is it fate that you workers believe in? Even fate has brought you here. You'll find the answer to my question with the rebels, because you are the only witch who can reveal this truth. Answer it and return to me, and I shall let you and your family live. Refuse me, and you and your family shall die.
A knife appeared, gleaming, at the base of Vittoria's throat. The edge of it prickled her skin. Her heart thumped, veins pulsing against the razor edge. She sucked in a sharp breath. For several interminable seconds, she thought about the weight of what both father and son asked of her, about this frightening world, overturning a government, the ice in Hodei's eyes. Hodei sank down. A chair appeared behind him. They were almost eye to eye now.
You may be a worker, but you're no fool.
The knife pressed deeper, slicing into the skin at her neck. Blood dribbled onto the blade. Her cottony mouth longed to swallow, but she feared it would be her death. Vittoria fought for something to say, but her thoughts were too loud, moved too fast. Instead, she held Hodei's gaze by sheer force of will. Her knees trembled like the silent songbird.
Your pair is sick, isn't he?
He asked. The knife cut deeper yet again. She squeaked.
Disease of the lungs, likely contracted on the farms, not to mention a broken back and partial paralysis. A poor stroke of luck, particularly when your mare just disappeared from her conscription to the landowner Moretti, an offense that could earn her the pike if she were ever found again. And your nephew, little Anico.
A spark of fear flared in her chest. I'll do it, she cried. 1 second she was staring at his livid gaze. The next she felt a cool balm on her neck. The knife disappeared. She drew in a shuddering breath and grabbed at the wound, but no blood showed on her hand. Magic had healed it? Hodei pushed out of his chair and shuffled closer. The magic held her fast as he pressed an arthritic hand to her cheek. Yellowing, pointed nails stroked the sensitive skin by her eye. His clammy palm felt like cold death.
You really shouldn't let your weaknesses show so easily, my dear girl. Go to the rebels,
he whispered, his breath sour on her face.
Find Esperanza's story and report back to me. This is your only chance to avoid a traitor's death and spare your family from pikes outside the castle.
Why? Why do you need to know?
Because I will not be deceived. I will not be played. Borrowed power is no power at all.
His nostrils flared, and his entire body vibrated with a rage that seemed to permeate all the way through his soul.
I will not be made a fool, not even in death.
He straightened, and the madness seemed to have passed. Something like admiration replaced his wrath.
Such a lovely face. All the landowner wives will hate you for it. Allow me to help with that.
He tapped her cheek gently, then slashed his nails down the side of her face with a savage growl. Vittoria cried out as hot blood collected on her skin and dribbled toward her jawline. He sneered.
There. Now they won't hate you so much. Such a perfect complexion deserves a little texture. You'll thank me for helping you one day, Vittoria, for there's nothing more vicious than a threatened landowner. The final gong at the Poena should be sounding right now. You wouldn't want to disappoint Mateo, would you? Hurry, hurry. Honor awaits.
Hodei disappeared. The magic that held her to the chair tingled as it faded. Vittoria leaped away from the chair, threw open the closest window, and vomited onto the sand outside.